saying thank you to everybody for being here. We're so excited. I think this is our first virtual event for NCR Forward members. Is anybody? I think it is. So it's good to see you here. Sarah, what do you think? Should we begin, or are you letting in more folks? Yep, I'm getting the thumbs up. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Wave. We can't hear, so we'll see everybody. I want to thank you for all being present. We're so excited to be here today. We thought you would like to get a little taste of where you're all from on this phone call. So Sarah created a graphic for us. I wonder if you have a minute, Sarah, amidst letting people in to share that now. So here's where we're from today. All over the US, and we have a few international guests as well. So welcome everybody. We're from east to west today and north to south. So it's wonderful to have everybody here. I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for being NCR Forward members. And I'd like to thank the NCR staff for all of their support for today. There's a few women in the background that I'd like to mention. Sarah, who you've met, Marge, Joe, and Stephanie, and I call them the safety net for today. So if you have any issues arise during the call, if you insert your question in the chat room, one of our members of our safety net will get in touch with you and help you figure it out. I had asked Heidi if she would select a prayer to start us off today, and she selected one from Joyce Rupp. So I'd like us to begin with a prayer if everyone is amenable to that. Is everybody okay with praying? So,
sure.
As you saw, we're from all over, and yet in the presence of God, we are all in the same place. So I'm going to invite you to do is, if you're watching with someone, a spouse or a friend, just take a minute and look at them and connect with them. And look at all the faces on this screen. You've arrived here physically through Zoom. Now bring your heart here and your spirit here as well. And let's breathe in that presence of God. And then breathe out. This is a beautiful prayer called Commitment by Joyce Rupp. Wise and faithful God, you lovingly abide in my depths and you graciously guide my every step. You lead me to ever stronger growth and draw me more fully toward inner freedom. I thank you today for the awesome ways in which you constantly enter my life as I pledge my heart to you again. This day, I renew my life's purpose of being faithful to our relationship. I give you my openness, trusting that you will lead me on paths that are meant to help me grow. I recommit my intention to listen to you in all of my life. I promise you my daily discipleship so that I may become an instrument of your love. Most of all, I give you the loyalty of my heart. May I do all in the circle of your wisdom and learn from the dance of your compassion in every corner of this universe. Source of energy, inner luminosity, thank you for being a loving radiance. May the lantern of your perpetual goodness always shine in me and through me. And all the people said, amen.
Amen.
Heidi, how are you feeling? Are you ready for us?
I am.
All right. I'd like to make a few introductory remarks. Heidi, I know you're going to tell us more about yourself as you begin, but maybe I'll say a few of the official things. Heidi began with NCR full-time as national correspondent 3 years ago. And as you all know, during that time, she's done extensive coverage on politics, the sex abuse crisis, women's issues, issues related with young people, with racism, and the use of money in the conservative movement of the church. But Heidi's time with NCR goes back longer than that. For close to 10 years, Heidi was a columnist as well, a monthly columnist. Her years in journalism are extensive, expanding 3 decades. She's previously served as managing editor of U.S. Catholic, as a reporter on different diocesan newspapers, and of course, as you probably would suspect, has taught journalism as an associate professor. I think it was at the University of Aurora in Illinois. I would like to just throw this quote out there because when I read it, when the press release, when we announced Heidi, I just thought it was so compelling, and I'd like to read it. It's from our publisher and CEO, Tom Fox. Heidi lives NCR mission in her personal and professional lives and has the skills needed to take NCR into the next decade. Given the way our church treats women, keeping them from authority roles, I am particularly pleased I have a woman, indeed this woman, to take the editorial reins at NCR. So with that, Heidi, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lori. Can everybody hear me? Hands, I guess, if they can. Good. So thank you to Lori and the entire committee for planning and launching this exciting series where members are going to get to hear from some of us here at NCR. And I was excited to be asked to be the first person for sort of a Meet the Editor event. And thank you to all of you who are members of NCR. Obviously, we're very grateful for your support. I'm coming to you today from my home office here in Chicago. I have banished my 2 children and husband and told them, even though it's raining, to go outside and not bother me. So hopefully we won't have any interruptions. And I'm happy to be outed as a big Joyce Rupp fan. I interviewed her once for NCR. I did an audio interview and have followed her work for decades and consider her a friend now. So I was lucky to see her a couple of months ago in Iowa, where she lives. So I was out there covering some things during the primary and got to see her. So I'm just going to start with a few remarks about how I became executive editor and some of my philosophy, but I'd really like to leave a lot of the time that we have for Q&A and just hearing from you, you members as well. So if you had told me back when I was a baby journalist that I would someday be editor of NCR, I probably wouldn't have believed you. So I first learned about NCR, it was in the mid-1990s, and I had just been hired to be a staff writer for the Archdiocesan newspaper here in Chicago. And back then it was called The New World. So I was getting a tour of the newsroom, and my tour guide, Dolores Madlener, who was a columnist and kind of all-around editorial assistant there, she was showing me where things were, and she said she was showing me where we kept copies of other publications that we got in the office. And she held up NCR and she said, "This is where we learn what's really going on." And I had to laugh because, of course, we were reporters ourselves, but she was basically saying, this is the place where you can get the truth. Now, Dolores died in December at the age of 90. She was a good friend of mine. And I have to believe that somehow she was up there in heaven engineering this promotion for me to executive editor. To be honest, I was a little reluctant to move into this job. And that's because my previous job, as Lori said, as national correspondent, has been, at least so far in my life, the best job I've ever had. So I've been a journalist a number of places, I've taught, I've done a couple other things, but as NCR's national correspondent, especially during these very exciting times under the pontificate of Pope Francis, and given all the things that were going on in our country and under the president we have right now, was a lot of news to cover. So I got to travel, I went from one coast to the other, I got to go to Rome, to events, to conferences, even to a canonization of Oscar Romero. I got to talk to interesting people every day. So some of them with positions like cardinals or bishops, many theologians, many activists, survivors of abuse, and everyday people. And to me, that was always one of the most fun parts of my job. I also got to do really deep reporting. And one of the nice things about being a reporter at NCR is the chance to do those kinds of stories. So I would spend weeks with paperwork, interviews, trying to dig about things and to report on important stories like the Me Too movement or sex abuse. And as many of you might have read in the last couple of stories that I did about conservative organizations in the church and their connections and how they're funded. So things like EWTN or Focus or Dynamic Catholic. And of course I got to write, so which is what I love to do. So who would want to give up that job, right? I had to be talked into it, was the case. But when our previous executive editor, so Tom Roberts, who had been editor before here at NCR, decided he really wanted to retire this time, this past spring, I was asked to consider possibly moving into leadership. So I like to say I answered the call, not from God, but from publisher Tom Fox, who asked me if I would be interested. We did do a national search, and I believe there were other candidates, but then I was selected and announced on Friday, March 6th. So most of you probably know right around that time, in fact, it was about a week later, both my own family and our NCR staff all started sheltering in place because of the coronavirus. Like I said, I've already worked from my home here in Chicago as national correspondent, and I was planning to already continue working here. I'm not moving to Kansas City where NCR is headquartered, but I wasn't planning to do it with 3 other people here at home with me. So I don't recommend starting a new job in the middle of a pandemic. NCR, the whole team rallied. And of course, for us, this was a big news story, as well as something that affected us personally. So in addition to covering the coronavirus, and especially how it was intersecting with the way it affected Catholicism and churches, everyone here at NCR really came together to help me learn the ropes as editor at the same time. So I officially started on May 1st, and I have to say it's pretty exciting, one exciting news story after another since then. So right as I was starting, we had the news of the call between President Trump and a number of Catholic leaders, including New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan, and Tom Roberts did an editorial about that right as he was retiring. Then of course we had the sad news about the many deaths of African Americans, including George Floyd, and the Black Lives Matter protests that erupted after that, causing us to all reflect on the issues of racism and white privilege. Then right in the middle of all that, we also had Trump, who did that photo op with the Bible, dispersing some protesters outside the White House, and then the next day making a visit to the Catholic shrine, the John Paul II shrine that was owned by the Knights of Columbus, and that was very newsworthy and controversial. And then of course we had another letter from Vigano, Archbishop Vigano. This one got tweeted by the president, so of course there was coverage of that, and all this at the same time that we continue to be reporting about the effects of the coronavirus and about reopening churches. In the 2 months that I've been editor, I have to say I think about all 4 of NCR's core values. So they're listed on our website: social justice, human dignity, inclusiveness, and excellence. But there's kind of a 5th one, and it's mentioned in our mission statement, that has already proved to be really vital for me as editor, and that's independence. So NCR is different than so many other Catholic publications because we are independent. We're not under the bishops, we're not under a diocese, we're not owned by a religious order. So right at the beginning of my editorship, we had this, well, I guess you could call it an incident. A number of people were writing critical essays about the controversial call between Cardinal Dolan and other Catholic leaders with Donald Trump. It had kind of turned into a mini campaign rally, we ran one such column here at NCR. Now at US Catholic Magazine, which Lori mentioned I used to work at many years ago as a managing editor, this is a magazine that's owned by a religious order, the Claretians, but who have done really great work for many decades. But they had two such essays being critical of Cardinal Dolan that we learned had been removed from their website. And our Vatican correspondent, Joshua McElwee, learned about this, and he quickly wrote a story about that. But we took it a step further. So we reached out to those two authors. They're both named Stephen Schneck, who works for Franciscan Action Network, and Stephen Millies, who is the director of the Bernardine Center at Catholic Theological Union here in Chicago. And we said, hey, now that those aren't published over on their website, we would be happy to republish them. And so we did. So we don't know why, for sure, US Catholic removed those essays. They wouldn't go on the record about that. But I do know that here at NCR, we have the editorial independence to make decisions like that based on our journalistic expertise and our own journalistic ethics, not because of outside pressure. So I'd like to conclude just by saying I think my friend Dolores Madlener from the Chicago Archdiocesan newspaper, and currently resident in heaven, I'm sure, would be proud, because as the executive editor, my goal is to continue this now 56-year-old tradition of truth-telling and independence, of NCR being the place where Catholics can they can always learn what's really going on, as Dolores said. So those are just some get to know you introductory remarks, but I'd love to hear from you, and I'm happy to take as many questions as folks might have.
Heidi, I'd love to start us off with a couple of questions that even have come in the last couple of days.
Sure.
The first one is, would you talk about the difference, Heidi, between editorial and a column?
Sure. So we have a number of columnists at NCR. We have regular columnists whose columns come out, on a certain day. Michael Sean Winters, Jamie Manson, Dan Horan, Joan Chittister. I forget what we have, a number of regular, and we have a couple dozen other regular columnists who run, every other week or monthly. We also accept commentary and columns from freelance writers. And I can tell you that since I've become editor, we've had a large number of pitches from people, because a lot of people have things to say given what's going on in the news, especially around the issues of race. An editorial is different in that that's an unsigned, so there's no byline, piece that we would run in NCR. And if you get our print edition, those run on the back page. And they represent the view of the paper. I've convened a small group of other editors to work with me on those. I write some of them and they write others. And they represent what the paper as an institution is thinking. Whereas I try very hard not to tell columnists what they should think or what they have to write. But of course I make editorial decisions about what columns to accept and which not to.
So that was kind of you answered the next question, Heidi, was, when we see editorial that says, and then NCR and editorial staff, you kind of touched on that a little bit. Would you just expand that a little bit?
So if it says editorial staff, that might be a story that's written and just not given a byline because it's a short story. I mean, number of reporters who do reported pieces, and sometimes I know that, it's different when you don't have a print publication in front of you, where the editorial page and the opinion section might be separated from the reported news stories. When you're reading things online, or you're just seeing one story because it's been shared on social media, maybe it's not always as clear what's a reported news story and what's an opinion piece. So we do both at NCR, obviously.
Thank you. If you see me looking distracted, I'm trying to write down the questions that are being fed to me, so my apologies. One question that's coming in, Heidi, is our bishop's reaction to the death of George Floyd, of course. I feel like you could almost say the death of George and we would all know. And what has been your perception of our bishop's response, and kind of in tandem with that, their response to the police brutality that issue is being raised as well? What's your perception of their response?
Yeah, I mean, I think that NCR has a history of calling the US bishops to task when we feel like they're not being the leaders that we need. And certainly in these times, there seems to be not a strength of leadership from the bishops as a whole. So again, I'm speaking of the US Bishops Conference. There certainly are individual bishops who I think have done a number of things that are strong leadership and are inspiring. On the issue of race, I'm thinking about Bishop Seitz, who did a piece for us that was a reflection, but also who was very visible out in a Black Lives Matter protest. But the Bishops Conference, and this is something that, you know, before I moved into an editor position, our previous editor was very good at editorializing on the weakness of their voice on a number of issues and the need for them to be stronger. And I think the statements that we've had from them are, if you were to compare it to how quickly or how strong their statements are on other issues that seem more important to them, like religious freedom or abortion, we aren't seeing the strength and the quickness that we would like to see on that.
Well, Heidi, this next question that came in, I'm going to ask right away because it's connected to what you're saying. And it's a big question, so you may need a glass of water. I'm just kidding. But the question is, if you would give us your kind of, if you will, a snapshot of your view of the bishops as a body and their relationship with Pope Francis. How do you see that?
So any insight I would have into that, I mean, I don't know a lot about our bishop's relationship to Pope Francis, but any insights I would have into that would be drawn from a piece that I did before the bishops' meeting. So the bishops obviously meet twice a year, and their bigger meeting is the one in November. So I believe it was last November, right before that meeting, I did a piece about who are the US bishops. You know, how many of them have been named by Francis, or how many of them are people you could consider more progressive or NCR friendly, and how many of them are sort of the culture warriors, and how many of them are kind of in between. I interviewed Father Tom Reese, who still writes a column that runs in NCR, and his belief was that you're kind of roughly halfway divided between these moderate, not very strong one way or the other type of bishops, and then these more right-wing culture warriors, and that the group of anybody that you might call actually progressive is pretty small. That said, there are new bishops being named, you know, every couple weeks or months for US, and we have a number of positions still open. So, I mean, it depends on the bishop if you talk about what's the relationship of the bishop to Pope Francis. I'm certainly not the expert on these things. We have a couple other folks on staff who, Josh McElwee is the person I go to whenever I need to know anything about Pope Francis. And Michael Sean Winters is a great source of information about US bishops too.
This next question, Heidi, has to do with election. And we've gotten a few questions about this, so I'm going to kind of frame it in a way that reflects a few questions. And that is, folks are wondering how we can have our voices heard in this process. And one person particularly identified with how can we engage kind of middle of the road Catholics, and they made a joke like, are there any anymore? But how can we engage not just in the process, but engage with the people in our lives about this campaign to help people see what's at stake in this next election?
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I wish I had the answer to, you know, how to end polarization in our families and our communities, our church and our country. I don't. What I can say is that NCR is gearing up to do a lot of coverage in advance of the election. So I think this is going to be one of the most important elections our country is facing in its history. And, we know that at least one candidate is Catholic, so we're going to be doing some stuff about that, and in that Joe Biden is a Catholic. But a lot of people are very concerned about the assumption or the history that Catholics, in particular white Catholics, will vote Republican, and in this case then for Donald Trump, who has made some promises about some issues that people care about, whether that's selecting judges for the Supreme Court and other courts that will rule in a certain way around issues of abortion, or whether it's about prioritizing religious liberty, or so-called religious liberty, or whether it's about just sort of talking the talk, at least, about religiosity or Christianity. But what I'm sensing is that so many middle-of-the-road Catholics have been pretty shocked by many of the not pro-life moves of this administration on issues regarding how immigrants are treated, how the elderly and disabled people were not prioritized at the beginning of the coronavirus. We hope to do a number of stories, and we'll certainly be running opinion pieces as well about the many issues of concern to Catholics, and especially those who take Catholic social teaching seriously in the run-up to this election.
Later in the summer, we're going to have Michael Sean on to talk specifically about the election, but I think folks are interested in just if you know of any organizations, there's an organization called Catholics for Trump. Are you aware of any other Catholics that are organizing like that? That would, I'm assuming this asker means Catholics not for Trump.
Well, I can tell you I'll answer that in two parts. So in addition to the Catholics for Trump group, there's also the CatholicVote.org group, which is also supporting Trump, and is an organization that can make that kind of political endorsement. And that's the organization that I wrote about. Oh gosh, my sense of time is a little crazy here. I guess it's been less than a year ago when I wrote about the technique of geofencing.
Yeah.
So that at the time CatholicVote.org was saying they were choosing these specific states that were very close in the last election, and where Catholics, especially white Catholics in suburban areas, could really make a difference for Trump. So they were capturing their data through their cell phones by using a geographic capture while they were at church. Now that we're all watching church on our screens at home, they're not able to do that. But that organization is still very active in campaigning for and promoting Trump for president. There are a number of leftist groups, Catholic, Christian. I went to cover some. Most of them cannot come right out and endorse a candidate because they are, 501(c)(3)s that can't do that. But a couple of them aren't. Obviously, there's Network, which is the group of religious sisters who do a lot of work around issues, not so much specific candidates. And I wrote about a group called Vote Common Good that was predominantly progressive evangelicals, but had a number of Catholics involved as well. They were doing kind of a bus tour around the country, similar to the Nuns on the Bus, that was cut short, again, because of the coronavirus, but they're still doing quite a bit of work around campaigning for social justice causes and candidates.
I know you were at the bishops' meeting, Heidi, when I almost said dreaded, when I'm going to call it weighted discussion about the Forming Our Conscience document was discussed. And we have a listener today who's making the suggestion, would NCR consider publishing Pope Francis's document that as Cardinal Supich suggested?
I'm not, let somebody send me an email on which specific document that you're talking about. We will be looking to church leaders to see what they're saying about not just individual candidates or issues, but around the topic of, democracy and the importance of voting. I mean, I'd like to do some stories around the issues of voter suppression, that a lot of examples that we're seeing, and especially trying to stop the ability of people of color and other people to get to the polls. But yeah, we'll definitely not be undercovering this issue between now and November. I can tell you that.
One of the, is kind of stepping away from the political questions for a bit, Heidi. Folks are asking you your ideas, given your work with some of the young voices or the issues our young people face. Do you see any possibilities or openings for more progressive or centrist Catholics to kind of enter the lives of priests and seminarians when they're at their younger and more formative places, to help them from developing these extreme views and kind of counterbalancing some things? Do you see any possibilities or openings there?
Well, certainly this is an issue that comes up whenever I go out and talk to people in parishes, because many people, this is where they are experiencing these conservative movements in the church. So they're assigned a new pastor. Often it's a younger person who comes from a less progressive stance. I don't know. I mean, it is true. I think that if you can make attempts to have relationships with these young priests, it's possible that you could have some influence on them. But I think the problem starts farther back in the pipeline, in that a more progressive man, and we're still limited to men for priesthood here in our church, is less likely to consider priesthood, given the state of, given kind of the hierarchical institutional church as it is today. I mean, there are so many young Catholics, I think, who are involved in their faith and in progressive issues because they are motivated by their faith, but they are not necessarily entering seminary in large numbers. And instead, the men who are choosing to enter seminary often come from some of these more conservative groups. Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, likes to brag about the number of vocations from people who go through their programs. And parts of their programs are very good, and they get young people on fire for Jesus, but they also have a real traditionalist slant, and are connected to other really pretty right-wing Catholic organizations. And those are the kind of young men who are choosing to go into seminary. This is a huge issue for the church.
I think I like the point you made right at the beginning. It really does start with relationships, and I don't think we should ever doubt the power that our connection with someone can have. It may not be readily apparent, but down the line it can have a profound effect. I'm taking a moment to rephrase this. Looking at all of us gathered here, Heidi, let's go with the word seasoned. We appear seasoned. This
looks like an AARP meeting.
I think this is a really exciting question, because I'm sure we have a great answer. What is our demographic, but also what are we doing to engage the next generation?
Yeah, so I get this question everywhere I go. And of course, I'm no longer considered young in our church, even though I might be a little younger than some of the people on this call. But NCR has a pretty young staff. We have a number of young people on our NCR staff with Global Sisters Report and with our new project, Earthbeat. Also, I just completed doing the process with some other folks on the committee with me to hire 2 new interns for our Bertelsen internship program. And I can tell you, we had a lot of applicants. There were 30 some applicants, and all very strong, young, committed Catholic people who want to pursue journalism and get experience with us. And we're very excited about the 2 we just hired, and we'll be announcing later in July. So I think there are young people out there, and we do want to engage with them. Increasingly, though, they don't read print publications. They're online, they're on social media. And I would like to see NCR sort of step up its social media game, do more multimedia. A lot of younger people are interested in watching a video rather than reading a story. And that's what I would like to position us to do. that said, those groups of younger progressive Catholics are out there. Our staff from Earthby was at the Ignatian Solidarity Network event last fall, and there are a lot of young people from Jesuit primarily, but other Catholic colleges and universities who don't know about that there are other progressives in the church, and they certainly may not know about NCR. And so we want to get our name out there and be a source of information and inspiration for them.
Kind of along those same lines, Heidi, would you comment a bit about our efforts to engage folks of other cultures in framing our stories, our editorials, our, the feedback that we receive, so that in turn what we do is, broadening and appeal as well?
Yes, so do you mean internationally or even just within the US?
I believe this question more has to do with US culture.
Okay. So obviously we do also have, one of the first things I did actually as editor was ask Josh McElwee, who is our Vatican correspondent, to also take something of an editorial role as international editor. So he's kind of wearing two hats right now, just to expand our international coverage, or just to make it more, more pointed. And Global Sisters Report, which is a project of NCR, does an amazing job with international reporting, always with a slant involving sisters. And those stories also run on our website and in our pages. In terms of reaching out to people of color and people from other ethnicities or cultures in the US, this is also a priority. Our staff at NCR is pretty white. And I, along with Tom Fox and other leaders at NCR, have really made a priority of really trying to look for people of color to join our staff. I've also made it a priority to try to have people of color in our pages. So as contributors, as writers, as sources. We have a lot of work to do on that, especially I think given the percentage and growing portion of the church that is Latino in our culture, we could be doing a lot better job of covering Latinos in the church.
One of the questions that I'm getting is about our relationship with colleges and universities. Do you have, or have you ever considered a strategy to, like, free copies of the paper, or, getting our editorial viewpoint and our stories to colleges and universities?
That's a great question that would go to someone else probably who's on this call. I have this vague recollection that we might have done something like that in the past, and we are considering something like that again. We have a great, home marketing and operations side that would be handling more of that, and with the leadership that we have on from our publisher and CEO, I think that's a great idea. Something I would definitely be for.
You might look to the Jesuit universities. Being the Jesuits are a pretty liberal gang, and I would be glad to help open that door if you wish.
Yep, we could put America there, but we try to do it. And I just see somebody from GSR saying, reminding to mention the GSR in the classroom, which is a project of Global Sisters Report that connects with folks in schools.
A lot of people, Heidi, are making really, really excellent suggestions for us to consider. I'm almost kind of captivated by that, and what I would really love is, rather than trying to hit you with all of them, and kind of get your reaction, maybe we could make that part of the evaluation that we'll do. We're going to ask all of you to fill out a survey, and I believe me, every person at NCR is nodding their head right now when I say we love your ideas and input. It's our intent and our deepest wish to remain relevant and helpful to our readers. So I'm asking for your, really thought-filled commitment to that we could really hear your ideas. These, we'll certainly take these, but anything you have to say to us. Am I right, Heidi? Am I speaking for all of us?
Sure. And I hear from readers and members every day, and I make it a priority to try to respond to everybody, even if it's very quickly, because I also have to edit the news. But I love hearing from people, and you're all kind of my eyes and ears out in the field, which is great.
One question, Heidi, that I'd like to ask, kind of a little bit of a divergent, although you mentioned it as part of your bio. Thinking about your EWTN story, I nicknamed it the Show Me the Money story. That series was so compelling and insightful and eye-opening. Could you give us a little bit of just, the historical view of that story? Like, where did the idea begin? How did you kind of research it and develop, the 3 themes for your 3 days? And then maybe share with us 1 or 2 insights that you gained that didn't find their way into the story.
Oh dear Lord, I don't know if I can remember that part. Thing.
Or you
journalists kind of do this. You immerse yourself in a story, right? And you think about nothing but EWTN for like, and then I write the story and I'm like, okay, what's the next story? And you pivot to the next thing. My memory is that that was just part of a broader commitment on the part of Tom Roberts, who of course many of you might remember did the first Where's Follow the Money story that was about the Knights of Columbus several years ago. And he just was very clear that he wanted me to continue to look at this web of connections. And so he really gave me a lot of freedom and time to work on that, and helped me with a lot of it's not that exciting. It's like pouring through 990 tax documents and looking to see who donated to whom or who's on the board. So I don't know, and it was quite a long series, so I don't know if there was a whole lot that I kept out of that I didn't do. I think that the impetus for choosing EWTN at the time, rather than, I mean, I have a list of other organizations that we could profile and investigate, but I can only do one at a time. I believe that came from Michael Shawn, who was just pointing out the reality that so many Americans and increasingly people all over the world tune into EWTN and think that it speaks for the broader church, even for church leadership, when it doesn't. And of course, if you saw NCR's homepage today, we had Michael Shawn's column talking about the recent interview between Raymond Arroyo, who is a host on EWTN, but also working kind of part-time for Fox News now, and his interview with Donald Trump that was filled with all kinds of softball questions. So I think that was the impetus behind that story. And we've kind of stayed on top of following what's been going on with EWTN. We might have some breaking news about that tomorrow as well.
Wow. I've had so many questions, Heidi. It's fun to try to narrow them down a little bit. How about if this is kind of, we're getting close to the end of the time. So this is a kind of a 2-part question. When you think of NCR and your journey with NCR, particularly the last 3 years as national correspondent and how we function, what do you intend to keep the same? What do you think is, hey, that's working well and we're going to stay that course? And, can you identify maybe a couple of new things that you'll be doing as the executive editor?
Okay, yeah, well, a very wise mentor told me, don't change too many things in the first couple months. So that's advice that I plan to follow. And certainly because I was not working as an editor before I was made editor, I've spent the last 2 to 4 months just trying to immerse myself in working with the other editors here on staff. So there are a lot of things I want to keep doing. I think that when I look back over the history of NCR, I always remember how old NCR is because I was born in the same year NCR was born. So I just turned 56 myself. That's a long time, and what a history and what a reputation NCR has for truth telling, for inspiring people, both in the exciting years after Vatican II, in the tough years when we have the conservative backlash, and now here in the Francis era. But also in dealing with a Trump presidency and some of the political things that are going on in our country. So I definitely see myself as in that tradition and wanting to serve progressive Catholics with giving them a voice and information. I do have a couple priorities of things that I would do differently. I want to do more with breaking news. I want to be fast. That's the journalist in me maybe, and that's the reality I think of social media today, is to try to also be known as the place that knows things quickly and can get information to you that you need, especially if you're kind of a church insider. I also want to do more to reach out to younger, to readers and to younger Catholics, as well as Latino Catholics, and as well as some moderate Catholics. So I think there are a lot of, you know, you could even call them former traditionalists or former trads, who are a little shocked at how extreme the right wing in the church has gotten, and have found that they see themselves more in the middle. And I'm often surprised at how people who contact me to have NCR do a story are not exactly progressive, but they trust NCR to tell the truth. So those are groups that I would like to expand our reach to, and I would like to do more multimedia, because I think that's just where the future is going. We've had a podcast for a while, and these things will take a little time and some staffing, but I would love to get some audio and video reporting back in our pages. I know GSR has been doing some of that, Earthbeat's been doing some of that, and we'd like to do it in NCR too.
Heidi, what a full plate, but what a great plan. I know for me, I think yes, my spirit was saying yes when you were talking about some of those new things. I'm kind of a news junkie, so I'm really excited about that. I think that'll be good, and I really think you're right. I'm a newcomer to staff, a longtime reader, but I kind of think of us as the best kept secret in a lot of ways. So I love that that's part of your thinking. Well, for those of you who are seasoned like me, you may remember the James Lipton Inside the Ink Actor Studio. He always ended with 3 questions. So Heidi, are you ready? I have 3 random questions for you.
Yes.
Question number 1, past or present, dead or alive, who would your ideal dream interview subject be, and why?
That was hard to narrow down, I have to say. I think I'm going to say Dorothy Day. She's a fellow woman journalist and social justice warrior. I certainly admire her and never had the chance to meet her in person. So that would be cool to go back in time and interview her. My dream, probably the most exciting interview personally that I've done maybe in my life was I once had the opportunity to interview Thich Nhat Hanh, so the famous Buddhist monk. And I was in Vietnam last summer, and part of our tour, we did stop at his root temple, but he's been quite ill, and I don't know how much longer he'll live, so I don't know if I'll ever have a chance to interview him again, but I think I'd go for Dorothy Day. Yep.
That's good. We all have books that we tell people we read, and then we have books we don't tell people we read. What's your beach read for the summer, Heidi?
Well, you know, I'm a news junkie too, so I read a lot of nonfiction and a lot of news. But at the end of the day, I like a cozy mystery, especially a female protagonist. And in a number of feminist theologians I've interviewed have also told me they read similar female protagonist mysteries. When I'm on the beach, I actually like substantial fiction though, because that's the only time I really have the time to dig into something like that. And my favorite author is Ann Tyler. Favorite author.
Our next session is going to be with Brian Rowe, and he's going to be talking about Laudato Si. He's going to look at we're 5 years in now, what are some of the challenges and inspirations that he sees most rising up. What question would you ask Brian?
Well, so, I mean, Brian has done an amazing job with environmental coverage here at NCR and now for Earthbeat, and he knows more about it than anybody else on staff. I'm a bit of a political junkie too, and so obviously in thinking about the importance of the environment in the upcoming election, we already kind of know what direction Donald Trump is going, the number of environmental things that he's rolled back. But I would love to ask Brian that if he had Joe Biden's ear, what would he advise him to do as he runs in the next month on the environmental issue?
That's a great point. Well, Heidi, in your first months of your new position, such an important one to us, you've taken a lot of time to prepare and think about this hour, and then you've spent it with us, and I'm really grateful, and I know we all are. It was really touching to me as your colleague that when word went out, you know, just for our Forward members to know, literally within 48 hours, we had 100 people registered. And it really speaks, Heidi, to how you're seen, and we feel so lucky to have you. So thank you for taking this time in the middle of, you look real calm right now. I want to affirm you for that, but we know you're under the water, your feet are paddling like crazy. So thank you very much.
Well, and thanks to everybody for coming. It's been great, and we hope to do these, more regularly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, thanks for that segue there, Heidi. On Monday or Tuesday, you guys, you're going to receive an email from us. And what we'll do is, a lot of you in the comments question have made suggestions for resources. So we'll make sure and copy all that and get that in the email. We'll also send you links to a couple of the articles that Heidi referenced, and maybe a couple other related articles to what we talked about today. We're going to be sending you, as well, as I mentioned earlier, a survey, and we'll ask your input on today. We're just launching this series, and we need you to help us make it successful. As I said, we want it to be relevant and meaningful, so we really need your guidance to make it so. The survey will be short, but I guarantee you it'll have the open field box where you get to say anything you want. So point that came up earlier today was, how can we, engage the next generation? And I'd like to say you're one of the main ways to do that. So if you would consider, when you see good articles in NCR, or, possibly even forward an invitation to be an NCR Forward member to your children, your nieces and nephews, the children of your friends, and say, hey, this is something that I really think you'd be interested in. That's how you will help us engage that next generation, which we all agree is so important. What we have scheduled coming up is in July. The presentations are going to be made by our 2 reporters who entered NCR through the Bertelsen internship program that Heidi emphasized or mentioned earlier. So we're pretty excited about that. Brian Rowe is going to talk about the Laudato Si 5 years in. And we're going to have Soli Salgado, who you may have just seen on our front page. Was that yesterday or the day before? When you work at home all day, you forget, don't you? One of our staff members sends out, hey, everybody, today is Wednesday. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Lose track. But Soli had a front page story that was just stellar the other day. And she has been doing a lot of work, as you know, with our Global Sisters report. So we're asking her to speak on some of those experiences. And then we'll have Joshua and Michael in August. Joshua will be talking about things of Rome, and Michael Sean will be talking about all things politics and election. In the email, you'll receive dates, times, registration information, topics, etc. And again, feel free to forward that email to someone and say, hey, you ought to become an NCR Forward member. Look at what they're doing. So with that, I'd like to close. Again, I asked Heidi to send a prayer to us. By the way, someone asked where that prayer was from. It was from Sophia. What is it called, Heidi? Prayers to Sophia? And we will include both of these in the resources as well, so you can see where we got these, Heidi got the prayers from. So as we close, I just again invite you to remember that map that we started with at the beginning, and we may be from everywhere, but we are all in the presence of God wherever we are. And I invite you to just take a breath and remember that presence. Be thinking of one another as we pray. The beauty of the process is crippled when I try to hurry growth. Life has its inner rhythm, which must be respected. It cannot be rushed or hurried. Like the daylight stepping out of the darkness, like morning creeping out of the night, life unfolded slowly, a petal at a time, like a flower opening to the sun, slowly. God's call unfolds, a word at a time, slowly. A disciple is not made in a hurry. Slowly, I become like the one to whom I am listening. Life unfolds, a petal at a time, like you and I, becoming followers of Jesus, discipled into a new way of living, deeply and slowly. Be patient with life's unfolding petals. If you hurry the bud, it withers. If you hurry life, it limps. Each unfolding is a teaching, a moment of grace, filled with silent pauses, breathtaking beauty, tears and heartaches. Life unfolds, a petal at a time, deeply and slowly. May it come to pass. And all the people said, Amen. Thank you, everyone. You'll hear from us soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Everybody,
Great
Bye.
job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, and thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful, Carolyn. Carolyn.
Thank you.
Very good.
Bye-bye.
Avoid.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
bye, everybody.
Bye.
Kind of like
Thank
popcorn.
you. Thank you.
Heidi?
Fox has certainly aged.
Heidi, I have a question.
Oh my gosh.
Who's speaking? I can't tell who's speaking, but I can hear.
Elaine, that photo on your wall, what is that? I used to be an Ursuline nun. So is that a protest of nuns? Where did you get?
That's from Selma. Yeah, it's a historic picture from Selma.
Oh, yeah. So they look like Ursulines, the one almost. Yeah. Anyway, I was wondering what they were. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Selma. Yeah. Thank you.
I saw Michelle Morick and Angela in the background. Angela a while ago. Oh, did you? Oh.
Share.